Welcome to the Spherity podcast season Product Passport Pioneers. My name is Susanne Guth-Orlowski and I'm Chief Innovation and Solutions Officer of Spherity. Today we're speaking to Dr. Johannes Simböck. He is Team Lead Battery Pass of Acatech. Welcome, Johannes. Nice to have you on the show today.
Hi, Susanne. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Johannes, before we go into the nitty-gritty details of the digital product passport, which this podcast is all about, we first of all want to get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little bit of your background and how you came to this position that you today have at Acatech.
Gladly. Well, I'm a trained chemist. I did some research in catalysis, in autogas treatment in RWTH Aachen and in the US at UC Berkeley. And pretty much after that, already joined Acatech in 2018, where I started off in the field of energy resources and sustainability. The first project was CCU and CCS, so carbon capture utilization and storage applications in Germany, where we discussed with industry and other stakeholders how to implement on the long haul CCU and CCS in Germany. I moved on to some other projects, maybe also relevant a little bit nitrogen in the agricultural system and food system, because in both of these projects we got close into like product characteristics like carbon footprint or environmental footprint, but also on the economic side, well, how efficiently can we produce actually products? So always the different aspects of sustainability. So that's where I started off with Acatech, and then different topic, the battery passport, where I jump started, of course, into the digital product passport earlier this year, and I'm the team lead there for Acatech and the Circular Economy Initiative within Acatech.
Thank you for this nice background. I admit I also had to look up the website of Acatech to understand what Acatech actually all does. There are a lot of very exciting topics on the website, but still I didn't fully catch how it's actually working and what's kind of the main mission is of Acatech. Maybe can you explain Acatech a little bit for us, the different areas that you're active in, how it's funded, and what your main efforts are?
Well, Acatech, the German Academy of Science and Engineering, is a public association. So we're a non-profit funded by the federal and the federal states and the federal government on one part, but we also get project funding for different activities like the battery passport or others. So we're publicly funded mainly, but we have also some support by so-called Senate companies that are partners of Acatech that have a yearly contribution and that we're in constant exchange there. So that is one pillar of Acatech, the Senate companies, but the heart of Acatech as an academy are the scientific members that are elected to the academy. And so we have those two pillars, so to say, the academia on the one side and companies on the other side, that we group together in working groups on different topics. Of course, we also include NGOs and other stakeholders, depending on the topic that we have and which fit we see, so that we have a really broad and holistic view of whatever we're discussing.
So everyone could actually participate at those working groups, or is that by invitation, or do you have to be a member? How does that work?
It's usually by invitation, so that we can form a good, let's say, a holistic group of people who have different views on the topic, so that we don't get one-sided in our discussions. But of course, we're open to being in contact to anyone, right? Because diversity makes the discussion always better. So yeah, we're open to anyone wanting to get in contact with us.
Mm-hmm.
And what we're producing, that's basically also an important thing, of course, is policy recommendations or options for the politics, but also for the public to understand what's at stake with topic A and topic B. You know, if CCU and CCS, if I get back to that topic, is actually a real solution for reducing the carbon footprint and so on, so that everybody can read on it, doesn't have to have a big background, but can understand actually what it's about and what the main issues are about it. And of course, that's also where we are going with the battery passport, where we have a little bit more detailed technical implementation also to cover. But in generally we're focused on the common good, so for the public and for policies.
So is it a bit of a knowledge transfer, for example, knowledge transfer of technologies that are around, maybe that are very technical, but then you kind of help with the transfer to public knowledge and maybe simplify the wording, simplify the understanding, helping with information here. And is there also the other way around, like the transfer, for example, of new legislations and how those affect the industry? Are those two topics covered by Acatech?
It always depends a little bit on what the project is about. So, for example, the battery passport, of course, focuses closely on the battery regulation and its implementation. But in general, it's really about getting the different disciplines together and talk about, like on academic side, where often, you know, people are working on their distinct research and not always see what the other research disciplines are about. So that is within science itself, but especially, of course, those people who are doing the work in practice, getting them together with scientific research, and everyone on stakeholders, be it also law experts and so on. So what can we actually do as a policy option? And give it with a given framework of laws, but maybe also where laws would have to be altered to get into the implementation of policy options. So it's a roundabout of disciplines and stakeholders that we try to get together and transfer the knowledge, as you rightly said.
Yeah. And of course, one of your important focus topics is the circular economy. What are the different areas that you are doing this job in?
So with circular economy, it's part of the energy, resource and sustainability field here at Acatech. So where I will not go into detail, we have also really dedicated projects to energy, be it hydrogen or the energy system in overall. But that's a lot what my colleagues are doing, very detailed with circular economy. Well, the big project right now is certainly the battery pass project that we're going to focus on later on in detail. But we also have a project that just actually shortly released a card game on circular economy business models. And that is intended to really get the discussion going in small and medium-sized enterprises, get people involved and in a playful way understand how they might, well, transfer circular economy principles into their business models and where they might have an option to get started there. So that's quite interesting, and I recommend everyone to check it out on the Acatech website. That's done together with WWF and funded by DBU. And another project is together with DERA, the German resources agency within the Ministry of Economic Affairs and Climate Action. Thank you. And they're focusing on a dialogue platform on recycling resources. So they have a lot of differently focused working groups, be it on technology metals, be it on building materials, where they get also, again, those stakeholders together and think about how do we get closer to recycling targets and what's needed to implement a more circular economy in these areas. So as we talked about earlier, getting those people together. So that's the main focus in circular economy currently also.
Yeah, as you mentioned, obviously that you're publicly funded. You also mentioned the business model work that you now do with the card game project. So how, as a small and medium-sized company, or also as a startup, you know, what does Acatech do for us? Obviously, kind of that's one initiative, but generally, what with which requests can we come to Acatech to work with you or ask for your help?
So as I mentioned earlier, we're building working groups on all the topics or projects that we're working on. So we're always happy to feature the broad diversity of opinions on any field. So any SME that is interested in getting in touch with us, we're happy to invite to. Some of the projects are more dedicated, let's say, to implementation, as I mentioned, the card game earlier, or the battery passport, where we also have a concept of supporting partners, where everybody's invited to join. And others are more broadly where we, give policy recommendations. So there we'd be happy to, field the opinions of small, medium, and enterprises with these concepts, but we also understand, and that's often, I'd say, a little difficult, that time to spare is in short supply in SMEs. So getting your experts into working groups, I can totally understand that it's sometimes a little hard to, but we're always happy to field any opinions and contributions.
I can only second that. It's really difficult to join all the working groups. We are kind of working with the Global Battery Alliance. We're working a little bit with other projects, also the Battery Pass project, a supporting partner. But as a small startup, it's impossible to actually be everywhere where we should be. So unfortunately, it's not always possible. Thank you for giving us the Acatech background, Johannes. Let's go to the Battery Pass project maybe a little bit in more detail, or the Battery Pass concept. Generally, what do you think about the digital product passport for batteries in general? Do you think it has potential? What's your general opinion of it?
So with that question, I'll go back a little bit to the work of the Circular Economy Initiative Germany that Acatech was doing together with Systemic, and there, that was before I actually joined the Circular Economy Initiative. Our colleagues really did a great job in working on batteries and traction batteries, and how they can, implement the circularity while the ramp up that is coming in the next 10 years is going on. So, and the battery passport, or the product passport for batteries, was one of the solutions actually that they found in their analyses. And so we're having, great expectations, maybe a little bit much, but I think the battery passport is a great vehicle to really get circular business models going, but also have a transparent look on, product characteristics that we don't have so much right now, right? So the battery passport is also at the forefront of digital product passports, and so that's where we're at also in analyzing the battery regulation.
Yeah, and that's why I also actually wanted to make sure the audience understands that actually Acatech has been very early in the discussions around the digital product passport, or battery passport in general, and definitely has given a large input in what we have today, what we see in projects and legislations. So this is obviously why you have a good right to be here at the Product Passport Pioneers podcast, because you've been there from the beginning, also around the concepts. From the the need from the digital product passport, what do you think is the most important goal of the digital product passport in your view, and for the things that you want to achieve, actually?
I think the major point is making data available where they're needed. And that has different dimensions, right? So we have the end user for batteries, for example, who wants to know what is the battery actually all about? Has it been sourced responsibly? What is its capacity, how state of health, and so on? And am I buying a sustainable battery? So one part. But the other dimension, of course, is other.
So informing the customer, actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because often we're talking only about, economic solutions, but we also need to get the public on board to what we're doing. And often the argument is, against batteries, oh, we're using all those resources, and children in Congo need to mine them for us. And of course, that's a valid point to make, right? But we need to make sure that the batteries that we are producing and using are responsibly sourced and so on. And I see the battery passport there really also as a vehicle to get the information to the end user.
We've actually been discussing this week. I was at the Global Battery Alliance meeting Monday, Tuesday, and there we were actually discussing how we transport that information to the customer, actually, because the battery is only a part of the car. And then do we put a sticker on the car, or do we put a sticker on the battery that maybe you don't see? So so sometimes the devil is in the detail, but obviously informing the customer is relevant. What other areas do you see very relevant for the circular economy point of view, for example?
Yeah, that's of course the major other part, where any second life operator of a battery, they will need to know what is left in the battery without, or currently they have to take a really detailed look themselves at the battery to understand what its state of health and so on, and what kind of power capability does it have. And so while that won't be the case that they don't have to do it at all anymore, the battery passport is still the medium where we actually can get the information to the second life operator, and it's vital to their economic decision. They need to know what is the battery capable of and how long is its remaining lifetime, because only then can you make economically sound decisions.
Yeah.
And so that, in our opinion, is certainly really important to getting circular business models started. For example, from EV batteries to stationary battery usage. Well, there is still a lot of discussion about it, well, how it can exactly work. Without any information, you won't be able to do much of it, or you will have to put a lot of effort into finding out what the battery is actually capable of. So
I actually spoke to a Second Life battery company yesterday, a small company in Wuppertal, and they had a lot of questions about what's actually in the product passport and what data will be put in there, because they, for example, asked me, will there be data in there that tells me that the car that the battery is in had a crash? Yeah, because that's also relevant for them. And so how do we make sure that the requirements from the Second Life reuse repair companies are actually being carried in the digital product passport? How is that achieved?
So we're at Acatech are also in lead with the performance and durability requirements within our consortium. And for example, what you mentioned with the accident, that is actually part in the regulation, but maybe we can discuss later on how sound that information can be actually, because that is at the core of our analyses. what is in the regulation and how can it be implemented, and can it be implemented, or how has the information, does it have to be understood by also second life economic operators. How do we get all the information in that we need? That's a really difficult question. I think it's a quite broad array of information actually that is featured in the battery regulation, with the trilogue that is going on and the 3 different drafts that are around from the Council, Parliament, and the Commission. It's sometimes a little bit hard to decipher where is it actually in the regulation, what is it, and so on. I think we're going to go into detail a little more on that later. But also there will be iterations of the battery passport, I'm sure. So we're working on the first draft basically, and also the European Union is working on the first draft, and whatever stakeholders will see fit will be getting into the discussion, right?
And I see, as the possibilities there, right? There are sensors available that can measure the temperature, if it's been hot or cold, which is also relevant for the battery, which can maybe also censor crashes or any environmental influences about the battery. So it's all thinkable, and we can put it into our vision. But I think we have to start easy and take the data maybe that's there today, and then further develop it and improve the product passport for batteries. Now we probably create version 1, and then version 3.0, maybe we can also have sensor information as part of it. Is my view on that. But maybe let's get into a bit more detail here about the EU regulation. You already mentioned it. There is some wording in there that is trying to define the requirements around the battery passport. What do you think? Is it clear enough? Is it clear what is actually needed, what the requirements are, and how, for example, concrete key value pairs need to look like in the battery passport, or does it need clarification?
So I think the battery regulation as is, and with the different drafts, I think they're working on it in the trilogue, right, to get it a little bit more in line, where the different drafts have on different points added data points and so on. I think it's a really good and broad draft. The battery regulation touches on a lot of very important things. For example, the recycled content of batteries has to be reported and so on. And so it touches on a lot of things, but at the same time, many, let's say, provisions are missing still the really broad definition, or not broad definition, the detailed definition, actually, what is supposed to be in the battery passport. And that's also natural at this point in some regard, because a lot of the work will then be done in the implementing and delegated acts that the Commission will add to the battery regulation. So now it's a framework basically of regulation with some detailed specifics, but also some wordings that we're not quite sure in our current analyses.
Well, I think the battery passport regulation is kind of concretely focused on batteries and the eco-design for sustainable products. Regulation is kind of a framework, and then there are coming delegated acts, but not for the battery, as I understand, but for other product categories such as textiles and buildings and so forth. So I think we have to concentrate on the battery passport or battery regulation and read the requirements directly out of this. I don't think there is another delegated act plan for that, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe someone can put something in the comments on this. But do you have some examples for us, for example, where the regulation is not clear? Maybe an example that our listeners can understand?
Yeah, so maybe just touching on the delegated and implementing acts. So there will be delegated or implementing acts on certain topics of the battery regulation. So for example, how do some performance data need to be measured? So all those details, they can't specify it in the battery regulation. That will be coming in delegated and implementing acts.
Okay.
So while we're trying to make a proposal also, if there are standards and so on, where we can set on or based on the performance metrics, then we will mention that, but the delegated and implementing acts will add a lot of clarity to that. And with regard to circular economy, also, well, we found some things that are not quite clear yet. For example, the repair of batteries is not, or in some of the drafts, not clearly mentioned. So when we're talking about the battery in the use phase, it's also important, or they mention the battery status, and that might be a waste status of the battery, a reused status of the battery, repurposed, so going from one application to another application, like we said before, from the EV to the stationary application. But within there, we don't see repair included really much.
Yeah.
While the ESPR mentions like defective or damaged as another possible state for a battery, we only see waste or not waste, and that might have implications for transport, for example. So if I have to declare my battery waste before it can be repaired, it's now as the worst case, then the transport costs will skyrocket for that and diminish or discourage repair, actually. So we think a little bit more clarity on how repair is being well counted towards this battery status would be helpful.
Interesting, yeah. And then there the devil lies in the detail, right? How what a massive impact this can have, just because maybe we have defined the vocabulary not in the right way in the product passport. So we can already see the valuable work that's being done by you, also by the research projects that are currently ongoing to define exactly this, to understand the impact of the vocabulary. Yeah, great example. Thank you.
And maybe just a second short example where just the details are still missing is composition of the battery. That's very important, of course, for recyclability. So on the one hand, the recycler certainly wants to know what is in it and needs to know to optimize their recycling processes. But on the other hand, of course, there are business secrets within battery manufacturing that you don't want to share with your competitors, for sure. So getting the compromise right there, that's something that we're also trying to do, but is still in discussion because it's complex, right? But it's also in the battery regulation, it only says composition currently. So with the current state of the regulation and without the implementing act and so on, you don't know exactly now what to do, and that will be clarified later on in the years, I think. But with the current state, it's still unclear.
And thank you for giving the example of the accessibility of information, because I think protecting the business confidentiality is also one of the big tasks that we need to solve. You probably know that we are approaching this task with the decentralized technology approach, where we say the data actually has to stay by the owner of that data, or who is responsible for the data, so that this party, for example, an actor in the value chain, can actually decide whom they are showing the data, or which level of detail they're showing to it, which can be solved better by those technologies, because you simply keep the data by yourself, instead of what we have now. For example, we have a couple of platforms where you have to put your data on a centralized platform where you don't really know, what's happening with the data. How is it maybe aggregated? Is it still up to date? When I have it there, put it there once, but in 3 years, it's out of date. So we think that exactly this topic can be tackled by self-sovereign management system, or for data, I would say. What we stand for. The European Commission is asking for a decentralized storage What do you think? What potentials does it have other than what I maybe just explained, or where do you see the chances of this technology to be used in the product passport environment?
Mm. Yeah, so first of all, I agree that decentralized data storage or being kept in the system of each data owner is where it's getting out, or where we're getting to. Also with the digital product passports. I think this self-sovereign data system, as you said, is kind of also needed because if we, for all the products that are coming in the digital product passport realm, have to make platforms and so on where it's stored centralized, well, that's going to be a lot of platforms, right, in the end, and maybe a lot of admin.
Who should keep them up to date and fund them and host them? So it's also would be a big question.
Yeah, yeah. And so such a role-based access model is certainly, and what is also already in the battery regulation, right? There are some of the specifics that are named for to be in the battery passport. They give different access models to it. So some information only is allowed to go to recycler in the commission, for example. That's, for example, composition issues. So no other competitor really should get detailed information that they shouldn't. And some information is only for the commission then, so to make sure that companies comply with the battery regulation, while others are public, right? So anyone who buys the battery can see them when they, well, scan the QR code or whatever it exactly is then for the battery passport. They can see the information that is important about this battery.
Yes. What hurdles do you see generally to implement the digital product passport in the coming years?
Well, I think you always have the two sides that I kind of already mentioned earlier, right? So how much effort is it to provide the data, especially when we're looking at the use phase, and when do we need the battery data? And getting this data granularity right and the update interval is, I think, also important to really maximize the added value, let's say. So
from the discussions that you have in the industry, are the most data points already available, or do you have the impression that actors actually first have to dig or dig into their data systems or calculate the values first before they can be made available for the digital product passport?
So it's kind of both. So some of the data is already well, standard data, you know, capacity of the battery, or similar things are available. Others are a little bit specific, and also depend on a little on the measurement conditions that are being made, but that aren't present yet in the battery regulation. So can they do it via algorithmic determination in the battery management system, or does it actually have to be measured with a certain interval? So that's not entirely clear, and the one, of course, means much more effort than the other.
So we have the data aspect, which is a hurdle, but do you also see, I mean, as Acatech, do you see all the parties empowered to contribute to the creation of the product passport? I mean, the different actors and their different company sizes. Do you think everyone is empowered to actually provide the data that's needed and the services that are needed to implement the product passport?
Yeah. So while I mentioned maybe earlier that, you know, restriction or some data might be sensitive to not be shared, we experience in our work that actually everybody is really motivated to get the battery passport done the right way. And the right way doesn't mean with the minimum of required data, but with the data that is relevant. So talking about use cases, right? So when do we need battery passport data? Well, when somebody wants to buy the battery, for example, be it an end user or being it a second life operator. So the question is, do you up to date need to measure some battery characteristics, or is it enough if you do it once a month, once a year, each 2 years? You know, when it comes down to a really detailed physical measurement, you have to think about like how often do you really want to do it if you only need it like in one case when the battery is sold to another user. So we're trying to get to or adjust to use cases that we have there. And this is not only the purchase of a battery, of course, because there are also other use cases. Well, having surveillance over the market, for example, also in a kind of from the point of view of the European Commission or from national states. So there are different use cases and different intentions behind the battery passport.
Of course, we have the big topic of resilience since 2022.
Exactly.
That we need to cover, and obviously the product passport is a vehicle for that as well.
Yeah, but as I said, I see really encouraging signs that everybody wants to get it right, and not in the minimum way, but really to make it an added value for everybody involved.
I can also see that in the working groups that I'm in. People are very engaged. A lot of engineers really doing their best, defining values, very skilled people. So it's really nice to see, good to see what's happening. So we are 2022 now. The battery passport, some say the system should be up and running 2024, and then it's becoming mandatory January 26. How do you see the steps until then? So what can we achieve until maybe January 26, and then where you see it maybe in 10 years? What do you think is the potential where we can get to in that time frame?
So looking down the road, I think maybe the 1st of January 26 is a little bit in debate, depending on when the battery regulation is finalized, just to add that. But I think the way there to really implement the battery passport, of course, means for everyone involved to also adjust their systems in-house, right? Getting their data right, getting information from their suppliers that they need to provide the data. So that will be, I think there will be growing pains, of course, in the implementation, and maybe a little bit upfront investment in that, and understanding also which data points will be actually useful. I think that will also develop then when the battery passport is actually in use. And as we said earlier, getting it better or even better than in a second version or an updated version of the battery passport. And overall, maybe looking the 10 years down the road, I think it's all about learning from implementing also the battery passport, but also understanding the similarities for other product passports, but also the differences, right? So the performance requirements for batteries won't be relevant for any other product passports. But for example, seeing that the data granularity is really of importance, and those general questions will be the same in all product passports, I believe. You always have complex appliances that have sub-components and so on. And so on what level of detail will you report, or do you have to report, for example, composition or so? And I think with the battery passport, some of those questions can be, well, clarified or getting on their way to be clarified, and then be used also for other product passports. And with the ESPR, with the Eco-Design Directive draft, I think the product passport is coming for many fields. And I think it's a great vehicle for circular economy. That's why we are there, and we're
Yes.
happy to work on it.
Maybe one last question, because you also at the beginning mentioned that you as Acatech look into the business models for also the digital product passport and circularity business models. You know, most of the people that are affected by the DPP maybe see it as just another regulation that they have to comply to. But how can we convince them to really get engaged if they're not already are, to invest in the digital product passport, because you see maybe more business models in there than just the compliance of the regulation? Do you have one example, for example, why it's worth investing into it?
I think, well, it will be different for different actors in the supply chain or in the eco design, in the ecosystem of batteries. But I believe that with the battery passport and the information that you can have available, you will be able also, for example, to optimize your product design.
Yes.
Like if we make it right, and that's always a great ambition, of course, but if we funnel information from the use phase back to the product design stage, or just the choice of materials, for example, that can be really a big thing for manufacturers, for example, to improve their performance, basically, or their product's performance. And that can be one example how we'll be able to work. But for that, of course, the battery passport needs to be implemented right also.
Yeah.
So getting the data to where it's needed. And with the involvement and engagement of everyone, I think we can get there. But it will be discussions, and it's not an easy thing to just put a passport on a wide field or on a complex field of batteries. We're aware of that too, right? So it's not black and white. It's always a little bit of effort that we have to put in. But I think it's worth it.
Thank you for your insights here. We've come to the end of this podcast session. Johannes, do you have one last statement that you want to give to the audience about the digital product passport or the work that you're doing?
Well, I think all of what we talked about is what is about getting engaged with us or with other actors of battery systems or other topics. I think we can make the battery passport only work with the diversity of opinions, and just for everyone to get involved with us. We're happy to field your opinions, to discuss with you what is working and what might not be working. So get in touch, and we're happy to discuss.
Wonderful lead statement, Johannes. So everyone, please get engaged in the project of the digital product passport. And thank you for listening. And I'm looking forward to welcome you all again to our next podcast, which will come out soon. Thank you and bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.